Hello, welcome. Already starting off the stream with some Wi-Fi connection issues. Don't you just love technology? When are we getting 5G? When is Chinese 5G coming to the United States? God damn it! I want my Chinese 5G so I can finally stop having these Wi-Fi problems. Alas, here we are. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hard Targets, open source intel by the people for the people, news from a multipolar world. This is Teray for the fourth installment of this new live stream news project that hopefully will pick up steam as the year progresses, because man is the year progressing. Man is the year progressing. I'm glad to be doing a stream a little bit earlier today, just because a lot is already happening. I'm on the East Coast. Not to give the feds too much information about me, because I know I got my haters. Shout out to the haters, but yeah, shit is already popping off all over the world, in America, in the Middle East, in Asia, in Peru, in South America. Escalations are heightening, and I just want to talk a little bit about some of the more prominent conflicts that have escalated just within the past 24 hours. Sometimes even in the past hour or two. First, I want to talk about Tyree Nichols, the 29-year-old black man who was murdered by Memphis Pigs January 10th. And the footage that's being released today. I don't want to talk too much about it. I went on a whole tirade yesterday for yesterday's live stream, rambling more about what's going on there. But considering that today the Memphis Police Department is scheduled to release the footage of the 5 black pigs who beat Tyree Nichols to death, they're scheduled to release that footage today, and just like 2 years ago, like this, we're all familiar with the escalation of riots that happened after the George Floyd murder. How that's I got one person watching the stream. Welcome. How you doing? Glad to have you on. Welcome to Hard Targets, my one fan. Yeah, so cities all over the country already poised for potential protests. Antifa all over the country on Twitter is already calling for violent retaliation, and the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, has already issued a state of emergency. 1,000 National Guard troops have already been deployed to the city of Atlanta. This is in response to last weekend's Antifa riots that burned down a police car, broke several windows in the downtown area. So this is already having consequences, and the reason I want to bring this up again, before me being on the East Coast, the United States, the earliest time zone in the United States, we're after this footage is released, we're unquestionably going to see some protests, even starting tonight. And I just want to get ahead of this as much as I can, in as small a way as I can. For who knows how long this is going to last? Maybe through the weekend, maybe for a month. Who knows? But just to say, if you are not Antifa affiliated, if you are Antifa affiliated, I hope you get your skull cracked open. I want more police brutality against Antifa. If it comes in a Thunderdome battle between the local police mafias, the corrupt police mafias in Antifa, federal agents in Antifa, I hope the police mafia beats your skull in, allegedly, spiritually, metaphorically. I hope for metaphorical police brutality against Antifa feds. But if you're not Antifa affiliated and you're thinking of going to these protests, don't. Start up a project to get to know your neighbors. If you're in high school, get your classmates together and start up a student organization to better your community in a long-term way, so that your community actually improves over the long term, and you get to know people that you live next to, and improve your community, so you don't have to rely on the police. Don't go to these riots. Don't go to these protests. The reason I say don't go to them is because this cycle of violence has been planned from the start by the Democratic Party. We already know this from 2 years ago after George Floyd was murdered. We know this back in 2014 when Michael Brown was murdered. We know this in 2015 when Freddie Gray was murdered. Like these, Black Lives Matter protests are a way to mobilize young people who overwhelmingly do not vote at all, let alone for the Democratic Party, just to mobilize young people to get politically active in a way that is beneficial to the Democratic Party. Why do I say this? Tyre Nichols, though his death is tragic and he was murdered by these 5 police officers, the fact that Memphis police are releasing this footage is specifically to get a response out of the population, to get a response of rage out of the population. This is not the first police murder. We're not even 4 weeks into the year, and this is not the first police murder, or even the most gruesome police murder of a Black man in the year 2023. But this was the most curated. This was the most heavily curated. This is the one that got the the federal government treats these police murders almost like testing groups. You know how advertising companies it does A/B tests for different products to see which gets the better response from an audience. The federal government does that with police murders. Even in Los Angeles on January 3rd, January 4th, the alleged cousin of Patrice Cullors, that heifer who made millions in the Black Lives Matter movement, a guy who she claims is her cousin, was murdered by the police during after a car accident. He had been asking for help, was tased, died in the hospital. Very similar circumstances to this. So a founding member of Black Lives Matter herself said that one of her relatives died after being attacked by the police. She only made one post about this on an Instagram with 3 posts. Otherwise, dead silence. So, there were people on social media trying to make this into a thing. Not a lot of response. Contrast this with Tyre Nichols. We already see, first of all, there's just more police officers involved. They were all charged with crime. They were fired last week, charged with second-degree murder, and I'm not sure if they were convicted, but charged with second-degree murder. So this is, and social media, the responses on all social media platforms is picking up a lot more, especially because the footage is more. Again, when I say federal government curation, the footage of Tyre Nichols' murder plays into Democratic hands of, police violence is increasing. Police violence is on the rise again. There's this epidemic of genocide against young Black men, which is true. We live in a colonial society. The police are corrupt. Yeah, this is all true. But saying that this is an increasing trend, that America is facing this pandemic of police is not true. Numbers are going down. There has been a small uptick after 2022. I think in immigration, but no. According to sources, it's been steady. It's been level, which there should be none. But that's not the world we live in. So the fact that they found some, the body cam footage which supports this narrative of we should defund the police, we should we should listen to Black Lives Matter and and Antifa and have no police officers out in the streets, is not only has that never been popular, not only has defund the police never been popular, but Black Lives Matter and Antifa have been ghost for the past 2 years until Tyree Nichols, until we find the perfect media storm for these actors to come out of the woodwork. Same people, even the lawyer defending the family, Ben Crump, same vulture who, I think he was involved in the Freddie Gray murder, who's definitely involved in Mike Brown. These are the same people coming out to get media attention because this has been the curated moment to invoke riots, to push this rage amongst young people, so that they can feel like they're getting politically motivated, and it ultimately will be political energy that is absorbed by the Democratic Party. The police are already involved in heightening their heightening their preparation against potential protests in Dallas, Memphis, of course, where even after school programs are being canceled because of anticipated protests, in New York, in Washington D.C., in the Capitol. In the Capitol, police are prepping for protests. Funny that they would be prepping for protests in the Capitol. What other event where the police preemptively gearing up for protests of a clearly rigged media outcome? In the Capitol specifically, I can't remember the name, or I can't say it on YouTube, without threat of getting flagged for misinformation. But I'm just saying, if you're thinking about going to one of these protests, don't. You channel your rage into getting organized. Join an organization, any organization, because it's not worth going and getting involved in getting swept up into the Democratic Party. Conflicts are escalating, and Joe Biden is trying to centralize executive authority under the military like he's already doing in Atlanta. Don't get involved. With that said, I want to talk about other places in the world where escalation is happening at breakneck speed. According to the Epoch Times, let me see if I can share my, and that's the banner is the first bit of news here, just in case I can't share my screen. But yeah, the Republican candidates, specifically Tom Tiffany of Wisconsin, representative in the House, as like 20 other cronies, are calling for the U.S. to recognize Taiwan as an independent country separate from China. Boy, oh boy, we're not even out of January yet, and the U.S. government is already escalating for straight up war with China. But let me see if I can share my screen here, just so you can see the full headline. The story was the quote from Tom Tiffany, this this chinless milquetoast dude, was first, published by the Epoch Times, which should already tell you the nature of this story, just how orchestrated it is to incite conflicts. Here it is, the Epoch Times. Exclusive. Representative Tiffany introduces resolution calling for U.S. to recognize Taiwan independence. So the fact that the Epoch Times got this exclusive, and let me see if I can find but yeah, there he is, Representative Tom Tiffany, this chinless goblin, published by a newspaper that is funded by Falun Gong, the Chinese cult that is against the Chinese Communist Party, that actively foments the sort of animosity to start delegitimizing the Chinese government and incite violent rebellion against a legitimate government that does a hell of a lot more for its people than the U.S. government. So the fact that the Epoch Times is the one who got this exclusive, who sat down with Representative Tiffany to get this story out into the public. 'Cause no, I've never heard of this guy. I know you've never heard of Tom Tiffany. People barely heard of Wisconsin. Of all the flyover states, Wisconsin is the most flyover. Specifically because it's right next to Michigan, which is actually worth visiting. So the fact that it was the Epoch Times who got this interview to continue pushing for the narrative that the U.S. should specifically drop a 4 decades long diplomatic strategy of strategic ambiguity, of not recognizing Taiwan as a separate state from the Chinese state. The fact that it was the Epoch Times, the Falun Gong mouthpiece, getting this story says a lot about the narrative that this bipartisan narrative, I should say, that is picking up steam over the and has gotten much more support on both sides of the political aisle this past year alone. According to the Epoch Times, this article, in this own article, this guy who I assume has been in politics for a while, even though I've never heard of him, has been. This is not the first time he has pushed, the House of Representatives to pass a bill recognizing Taiwan as a legal separate state from China, which, again, let me remind you, is something that China is willing to go to war over. That will start World War III. But this is not the first time that Tom Tiffany has suggested that we do this, that we drop a 4 decades long diplomatic strategy of strategic ambiguity. That he did it first in 2020 and again in 2021. And by his own admission, did it alone. Had no one willing to support him, even 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. And yet, now that he's reintroduced this bill for a 3rd time, he now has 18 people in the House of Representatives backing this bill. Now, all of a sudden, this guy has bipartisan support for thrusting the U.S. into an active hostility with China, which will spark World War III, of saying China has no legitimate claim over the island of Taiwan, which it recognizes as a part of China. There is no one China policy. The United States should recognize Taiwan as a separate diplomatic entity and a separate trade partner, something which it has not done to avoid this kind of hot war. Now, all of a sudden, 18 other people out of nowhere are saying that this is a good idea. What's changed? Obviously, the war in Ukraine has made this sort of escalation, has putting the U.S. at the center of starting these hot wars on every single continent. The U.S. support of Ukraine has a big influence on U.S. relations with Taiwan. Specifically, the fact that the Ukraine war is now becoming increasingly unpopular in the United States, and the fact that Ukraine is now visibly and unignorably losing the war, where Russia is geared for a spring offensive. And the U.S. has been pushing all of its NATO partners to send Leopard tanks. And Biden himself is allegedly sending 31 U.S.-made Abrams tanks. If they actually get to Ukraine, who knows? But if it was a bluff, it was a successful bluff, because dozens of other countries are sending German-made tanks to Ukraine in preparation against it. You see how this preparation works? In reference to these police forces in cities across the country of America getting prepared for these riots, which are a clear escalation of conflict, which was curated. You see how this preparation works. This escalation of military conflict works. You're starting to see how it works, how it affects geopolitics, and how that geopolitics blows back to American politics. It is important to be able to recognize these historical patterns, so that when the time comes to organize, so that we can resist war hawks, these bipartisan neoconservatives trying to start a nuclear exchange with Russia and trying to get into a hot war with China. It's important to know that where these things start. It starts here. It starts in members of Congress normalizing this kind of legal precedent. It starts in, before it ever becomes a military conflict, it starts in Congress, it starts in academia, it starts in the media, it starts in think tanks, it starts in this industry of chinless intellectuals and bureaucrats like this, normalizing this kind of legal language, these legal consequences, this informational warfare. It starts there. So the fact that it only took a year for this guy to get bipartisan support, 18 other members of the House of Congress to back this guy in a suicidal mission to recognize Taiwan. And speaking of bipartisan support, Epoch Times also pointing out that, yes, Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy is planning a visit to Taiwan, something that Nancy Pelosi's dumbass did last year, flying in the face of diplomacy with China, who was saying that this is an escalation of of diplomatic relations. Like, we are worried that y'all are bringing all of these weapons to Taiwan, of militarizing Taiwan against us, even though Taiwan is a legitimate part of China. Nancy Pelosi doing this, a Democrat, and now new Speaker of the House Republican Kevin McCarthy doing the same thing, getting us used to the idea of getting into a hot war with China. Same thing. Suddenly there's bipartisan support. Everyone condemning Nancy Pelosi, saying, why the hell is the third most powerful government official stepping foot in Taiwan? But now all of a sudden, crickets. Or support from both sides for Kevin McCarthy. This escalation is planned. That's why they get prepared for conflict well beforehand, because they are intentionally trying to cause conflict. They are intentionally trying to cause conflict. Which brings me to the last bit of news that I got. Don't want to be going on for too long, trying to be concise with these live streams. I want to be in and out. We're learning over here at Hard Target. But for the last bit of news, I want to talk about the escalations going on in Palestine. It has been a crazy 24 hours in Palestine. There, rockets coming in and Iron Dome shooting down rockets from members of Hamas, and then the IDF going and murdering civilians in I think it was in Gaza. Now in the city of Jerusalem, put up the banner here. Yeah, and at least so far that we know of, 7 people in the city of Jerusalem killed at a synagogue in the city of Jerusalem by a gunman who has been killed by the IDF, who opened fire on the synagogue, killing 7 people and wounding a couple more. And this is Maybe you clicked on this video because you saw the title of the live stream, Happy International Holocaust Remembrance Day from Gaza. Not going to openly pick a side here in this particular conflict, seeing as how many people are deplatformed for speaking out against certain individuals. But that's all I'm gonna say is Happy Holocaust Remembrance Day from Gaza. Coincidentally, there's footage coming out of in Palestine, from in Gaza, in a couple of regions of Palestinians celebrating the retaliation taken by this lone individual. Not a lone individual. He was he was a member of Hamas. Yeah, I think that was confirmed. He was a confirmed member of Hamas. But you have Palestinians in the street already. This is happening now. Celebrating with fireworks in the streets of Jerusalem, in the streets of Gaza. It's on my Telegram. I don't have it pulled up, but you can. Yeah, you can go to my Twitter if you want to see one of the videos. If you want to see one of the videos, I'll be posting there later today. But yeah, again, a cycle of escalation that really is defined by one side. Because, yes, 7 members of a synagogue were murdered by this gunman. But 24 hours after, the IDF murdered 15 Palestinians in retaliation for Hamas rockets flying into Israel-occupied territory, and being taken out by the Iron Dome. 15 people, 15 innocent people. This is the same story for every. Now, I'm not going to condemn Hamas. I'm not going to condemn. I'm not going to condemn a group who is for their aggressions. Are they aggressive? Of course they are. Palestine is being occupied. I'm not going to condemn them. When nobody wants to be the one to condemn. The Nakba, the catastrophe of a third of Palestinians being pushed out of their homes by force by the Israeli military, women forced at gunpoint into the sea because they had to choose between drowning or being shot by the IDF. Nobody wants to condemn that. So no, I'm not going to condemn Hamas, but I'm saying this cycle of violence is defined by one side. It starts with one side. And this, the murder of 15 Palestinians by the Israeli government is condemnable on every level, no matter what the initial cause of escalation was. Condemnation belongs on one side and one side only. As long as Palestine is not free. I don't care. I don't care if those 15 people hadn't died. The fact that that their land is occupied, that they were being shot at in the first place, even if they didn't die, still only one side must be condemned in this conflict. Yes, it's messy, and suffering should be avoided wherever possible. We should put in 100% of our effort to avoid suffering. But the suffering in all of these different, like not just in these particular conflicts, but conflicts, yeah, in a class-based, society. We live in a society divided by classes. Colonialism being the primary contradiction, defining class across the world, of a colonizer class and a colonized class. Conflict is 100% the product of one side of that class division. And so all actions by the other side, by the colonized class, by the underclass, by the class with the boot on its neck, can never be condemned when it is an act of retaliation against the initial violence, the initial genocide, the ongoing genocide of that underclass, of that colonized people, of the people being genocided. This is an instructive 24 hours of what 2023 is going to look like. Because this is happening in the middle of winter. Surprisingly, the fact that these riots that the police are prepping for here in America are being prepped for by the police in the middle of winter makes me think that the bipartisan ruling class, the globalist uniparty, the alliance of Democrats and Republicans, who really are on the same side of keeping their boot on our neck. The fact that it's happening in the middle of winter makes me think that they are desperate to escalate global conflict. Because these kinds of events always happen in the middle of summer. When the blowback reaches the shores of the United States, it's always in the middle of summer. Always, 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 always when the weather is warm. When you can get more people corralled outside so you can recuperate a larger number of people into the two-party system. So you can take all of that anger and all of that new political activism and you can reabsorb it into the electoral system, into getting people to vote. Makes me think that it should have happened, like they were planning for this, because it is planned. But it makes me think that it was being planned for last summer. That the plans of the ruling class didn't go off without a hitch. Because just like in the play, like because the ruling class is not creative. It's not. The ploys that Joe Biden used in 2020 to win the presidency, up to and including starting Black Lives Matter riots in cities across the country to mobilize people under the age of 35 who, as a demographic, just don't vote, to mobilize that base and absorb them into the Democratic Party, which took about 2 months. From May 25th, when George Floyd was murdered, up until the end of July, when those protests all of a sudden became occupied. 80% of protest goers at that point were white liberals. 80%. 80%. 2 months for that to happen. Makes me think that it was supposed to happen again last year instead of this winter. The timing is odd, out of character, to say the least. The empire is unstable right now. Divisions are fomenting, both between Democrats and Republicans, and even between Democrats themselves and Republicans themselves. Republicans were divided on who to elect Speaker of the House in the one part of the government they managed to get a majority. Democrats are now rushing to stab Joe Biden in the back to get him impeached over these documents. Like his lackeys are, rather than Tucker Carlson pointed out, his aides could easily have burned these classified documents. Nothing stopped them. That's what someone loyal to their own party would do: burn the evidence, protect their boss. And yet, 5, 10, 15, however many unclassified or classified documents that have now been discovered, they keep being discovered rather than burned, which points to, again, deep divisions within the Democratic Party, divisions between parties and within the parties. The empire is unstable right now. And so, of course, bipartisan support is being rushed at breakneck speeds to start a hot war with China, something that both Democrats and Republicans can agree on. Even though nobody in the United States wants to get into a war with China. Nobody wants that. Except people in the media. Hell, even Tucker Carlson won't stop talking about escalating conflicts with China. Tucker Carlson, the one sobering voice in mainstream media, still has this impulse to start World War III over Taiwan. Why? To heal the divisions within the ruling class. War is their unifying battle cry. So the fact that they're rushing into this faster than they ever have, even though they're in the middle of a war with Ukraine, speaks to the fact that when Ukraine loses, and they will lose, it is inevitable, it is becoming more apparent every day, that full steam ahead for the American empire to start militarizing Taiwan more than they have been, to start militarizing Japan more than they have been, South Korea more than they have been. As Europe descends into balkanization and Ukraine becomes the new Israel, a new militarized Zionist occupation to split apart the European Union and bring terror to the borders of Russia. Not to mention anyone else who opposes U.S. military hegemony. U.S. can now focus its full attention on China. We must see this pattern so that we can stop it before it starts. Call these people out. Call out Representative. Now that you know who Tom Tiffany is, make sure to call these people out and say that, no, you can't manufacture our consent to start a war. We do not consent. Manufactured consent is fake. It's fake. We never gave our consent for this. Just like the people of Palestine never gave their consent to have an occupying military base put on top of their homeland, and then have Anglo-Saxon Zionists call it Israel. We do not consent. The conflict is illegitimate because it was started by you, and any act of retaliation, of organization, to liberate ourselves from that conflict is justified. So, get organized, y'all, rather than going to any protests today. Get educated, get organized, talk with your neighbors. What do they want? How can you build it? Get your friends together. And let the people know that you do not consent to World War III. You do not consent to Antifa burning down your communities. You do not consent to Cop City being built in Atlanta to work with the Israeli Defense Force to bring urban warfare to the United States. You do not consent. I will leave you with those words for now. Thank you so much for tuning in after the fact, for coming and watching this live stream. I appreciate it, as I'm just getting started. I will see you all hopefully tomorrow with more news from a multipolar world. My name is Teray. You're watching Hard Targets. Make sure to like and subscribe. It's hard targets on YouTube, on TikTok, on Telegram. You can just join my Telegram channel. Let me see if I can. Let me drop the link to the Telegram channel here in the chat before I go. Really should do that at the beginning, huh? Really should do that in the beginning. But there's the link to the Telegram channel where I'll be giving news, because you never know when you're going to get taken off of Twitter, off of YouTube. Follow me on Telegram, and I will see you all later. I'm out.